I'd like to bring up a panel, our resiliency panel. So if we can have Greg Mundis from Scripps, Mike Wang from the University of Miami, Melissa Erickson from Duke University, and Dan Resnick from the University of Wisconsin. Good morning. So I got my questions here. Now, none of you have heard these questions before, so. All right, why don't we start with Greg? All right, Greg. Actually, if maybe the first thing you guys do when is give a very short, brief introduction to who you are and where you are. But Greg, if you could, after doing so, tell us what have you done over your career to create room for both work and for personal life, knowing that spine surgery and a balanced lifestyle are often not in lockstep.
Awesome, yeah. So Greg Mundis, I'm from San Diego, practice spine out there, orthopedic in background. And just want to applaud you guys for having this session. I love the title of it. I love Kelly's talk, like what you said. Like I think it for sure needs to be part of what we discuss on the regular, honestly, with our fellows, our trainees in particular, as they're learning how to adapt and grow and respond to these situations early on in their career. And that may actually end up being the most significant way you can mentor another human. And I think we all hear the horror stories of our trainees where it kind of goes downhill early in their career, and it's always heartbreaking to hear that. And if we could have them on a path to success, I think that's great. And I think Kelly said, like, why don't we have, like, if we're going to do a PSO, like, we know the 10 steps, right? Like, we know it ahead of time. But when we think about a bad complication that happens, why don't we have that, like, laid out for us, 1 to 10, on what we should be doing? And I think a great challenge to us today. So you gave me a question that's hard. And if you guys know me, it's like, it's really hard. Like, so, and I'll have a few comments about it, right? The whole idea of, like, work-life balance. So if everyone just take a second and, like, think about a stove, and some of you guys may have heard this before already, but just think about being in the kitchen and then looking down at your stove, and there's 4 burners. Just like imagine that. And then we have gas, okay? It's not electric, it's gas, like legit burners, all right? So in life, we have sort of 4 categories I would think about. I think we have our family, we would all agree that requires some of our gas. We have our friends, or like maybe our social network, call it, outside of our family, that's important. We have self-care, which do what you want with that. For me, it's cycling. It could be yoga. It could be, you have an art studio, whatever you do for, like, your self-care. And then your last burner is your work, right? So if we look at, like, people that are, like, extraordinarily successful in this world, the Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, et cetera, if you look at their lives from a 36,000 foot view, you'll see kind of a decimation in numerous of those lives, because in order for them to be vastly successful within their world, and I would argue this holds true for many of us in this room, is you got to turn that work burner on. But the reality is that there's only so much gas. So if you turn one burner way on, there's the gas to the other burners is going to have to be turned down. And the more you turn down those alternate burners, the more you're going to succeed in that little area that you're at, right? For instance, if it's cycling for me, that's all I wanted to do, and I turn that burner way up, well, of course, I'll be really good at that, but perhaps it's at the expense of everything else around me, right? And there's this ebb and flow. And the reality is that 24-hour day really, really does remarkably relate to this burner, because there is a discrete amount of time that we have. The problem is, in our careers, we are conditioned to keep the work burner on through our training, residency, fellowship, and early in our career for sure. And then as we get more successful, a lot of times that work burner stays on, and we kind of neglect the other areas where we see divorce, or we see social relationships really, really suffer, or we see our health, like we heard today. Like, it's crazy how our health is affected by the work that we do. And really no one really pays attention to it outside of us that have to live through it. So the balance in life, I think, really is very dependent on the phase of life you're in. If you're in residency and fellowship, listen, you need to freaking hunker down. You need to go turn that burner way the heck up. This is your time to learn and grow as a surgeon. You gotta go in hard, and it may be that you only other one that you can keep on is your family. And so it may mean that other things suffer in your life, but if really your family is what's important to you, if that's what you have at the time, well, then you might need to really invest whatever you got in that. And you may have to let the other things fade away a little bit. And then when stuff settles out, when you're in practice, you can like turn the other burners on. The key though is to be able to figure out that work burner and what you do with it. And I will say, I, for one, have not done a great job of that, you know, and I have an awesome family, but I've really allowed a lot of other things to get hurt by it. Predominantly for me, it's my social network. So I have a lot of great friends on the academic circuit, I would say, but like in my home life in San Diego, like the amount of people I hang out with outside of my family has suffered some. So I would say just maybe the reflective thought for at the end of my 5 minutes here is just to say, like, just be aware that you have a limited number of resources and a limited time in your day. And just be aware of your burners. Because I guarantee as you look around at people now, you'll be unable to unsee this analogy because you'll look like how many burners they have going, like, and how hard are they going. But just realize at different points in your career, you can actually manipulate this. Month to month, you can manipulate it, and it's okay. There's times you got to say no and turn burners down. There's times you have to say yes because of what you prioritize.
Thanks so much. That's such a great analogy because I know that oftentimes I've got all 4 of my burners turned all the way up. And when you do that, as you said, there's only so much gas. That means everything suffers, right? Nothing's getting the full attention that it needs. So that's great. Thank you so much. Mike, how have you maintained confidence in judgment and risk-taking, particularly in developing, and you are the king at this, developing new techniques and utilizing and employing new technologies, especially when the outcomes don't go as expected? How do you maintain that confidence in your judgment, your risk-taking?
Yeah, so first, let me just say that, Adam, I really enjoyed your talk. I think it was fantastic. I wish I'd heard a talk like that when I was younger. It would have helped me a lot more. I mean, let's look at the basic concept here. It's pretty obvious, especially when you're at a national meeting, that if you are at the cutting edge of whatever field you're in this case, spine surgery, it is highly beneficial to have the ability to be there because then you develop and iterate knowledge and skills faster than anybody else. And then everybody, patients, industry, societies, whatever, are seeking your input or knowledge or skill set, right? So that's obvious. Everybody wants to be like the cutting edge person. But the context is the problem. The context is that we as humans all have slightly different demeanors. And so if you look at like Scott's parabola, whether you're an early adopter, middle of the pack, or laggard, you may not have it in you to want to be at that risky, uncomfortable situation that you mentioned in your talk, Adam. And I think that if you look at the context, modern healthcare systems, and we've heard it a lot now, they're intrinsically conservative. And I don't mean politically conservative. It's the opposite. If you think about the type of language that non-surgeons, most administrators are either nurses or internists or professional administrators, the language they use, like zero harm initiative or never event, the language alone says volumes about how it's an impossibility that they would never reward someone at the cutting edge, at least from an administrative perspective. So if you have a person who's willing to take risks like me, it's easy. But if you're intrinsically risk averse, which most doctors are, and you're in this context where you're only being rewarded for just checking off the boxes on Epic every day, right? Think about what that means. That means it's very hard. So I would tell you that if I were to think of the 3 things that would matter for those people who are like, I want to be at the cutting edge, but somehow I'm just never there. I would say, okay, first of all, you said it, find your tribe. You know, Kelly Bannigan talked about this. And what is that tribe? So if you are with the cutting edge tribe, you start to develop the ethos and the competence. For example, when I was first starting, spinal surgeons and neurosurgery didn't do a lot of deformity, right? So I started trying to do deformity, and I would have problems. And what would I do with that? There was nobody at USC that was going to help me, so I'd call my friend Bob Heery, who's one of the early neurosurgery deformity surgeons. Or if I had an SI problem, I called David Pauly, because these people are at the cutting edge. And then they become your friends, and then you develop fellowship with the leaders, with the cutting edge people, and you begin to become confident in that sense. The second way to do it is, and the second important part is, you think about what it means to be at the cutting edge. Now, what people don't want to admit, right, is that you're going to make mistakes. Own it. Radical transparency. And Neil Non's good at this. Neil Non's always up there talking about something, and 5 years later, like, I don't do that anymore. But people hate that. Nobody wants to get up on stage and say, you know, I don't do that anymore because that didn't work so well. Early XLIF days, I remember, you were part of this. We wrote that paper about the thigh pain, right? And Evasive hated it. But you and Solis and the leaders, they iterated on that. That's not such a big problem anymore, right? I would say right now, if you looked at today, 2026, that's endoscopy. It's a low-trust environment. Endoscopy and societies are not mixing well. Why? Because have you ever heard an endoscopist get up there and say, and I want to anger them, oh, yeah, this stuff doesn't always work. No, everything works. They all have perfect outcomes. So we know as master surgeons, that's a bunch of bunk, right? So be transparent radically with your patients, with everybody, and then iterate quickly. You say like, yeah, that didn't work so well. And if you look at like our awake fusion model, we changed it very quickly. So this didn't work. Let's try this, right? But people get dug in. You spend 10 years learning how to do an ACDF. You don't want to change it anymore, right? It's hard. And the last part, I think, is the area that maybe for the young people listening, this really matters. You need to be in an ecosystem that doesn't punish innovation. And I know you're thinking that doesn't exist. So I've worked at two places, USC, University of Miami. I was offered a lot of jobs that were going to pay a lot more money, maybe double, and have a lot of enticing features. But I chose those two jobs because I knew the leaders, meaning the chair, Steve Giannotta, now Alan Levy. I've seen so many young surgeons come through who took a job and they were paid a lot of money. But the first time they had a problem because they did something different and they violated the protocol, whatever the old way of doing things were, that person got burned. And it often led to a job transition. So these are the three things, again, I think. Number one, find your tribe, the leading tribe, if that's what you want to do. Number two, be radically transparent. And the last is be in an environment where you're not going to be punished every time you try something new.
Great, thank you so much. Failure is a part of success. You have to fail. You have to be in an environment where it's okay to fail. Sure. Thank you so much, Mike. Melissa, what helps surgeons sustain resilience as priorities and personal responsibilities evolve over a career, and how do you teach that to the next generation of trainees?
Great question, and thank you again, everyone, for this session because it's such important topics. I think the number one thing would be make sure that you consistently anchor yourself, and this goes to what you were talking about, something beyond just work, so that we know that our careers are going to change, our priorities are going to change, we're going to go through different stages. So making sure that you give yourself time to go back and anchor yourself to your why for everything, not just your why for work, but for everything else, and give yourself time to reassess. Don't just assume that it's going to be a static climb and that you're going to achieve greatness and there's one path to get there. We've heard so many different iterations of that in the previous talks. And so just building that in to making sure that you can adapt as you change. And I think right along the lines of what you said, radical transparency with yourself, with your peers, and with the people that you're training. So when you do hit a setback or when you have a tough case, having a moment to yourself to give yourself time to process that, being honest with that, having peers that are true friends that check in on you and you do the same thing for them, and then talking openly about that with your trainees. And this is something that we haven't done, this session being so cutting edge in terms of addressing things that we haven't addressed in the past. I think normalizing that and saying, hey, we are going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this openly. It's not a stigma. And we're going to intentionally make space to talk about that openly in the operating room. That if you had a complication, checking in on your resident, saying like, hey, how are you doing? Did you get rest? Have you talked about, are you okay? Checking in with them. And also being honest and radically honest about it and saying, that was tough for me. I had to give myself space to just kind of recoup because I had a tough run of call or we had these really complicated cases. And instead of kind of shying back about that, pushing and leaning harder into those conversations, because I think that's a really big part about what makes us better.
Great, thank you so much. It's so meaningful, or tell me what your thoughts are on having those conversations, those interactions in person, being truly connected, not via text or Snap or whatever people are using.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're all subject to the tyranny of time. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sending a text message. And sometimes that's what it is. It's a phone call on your car ride home to check on somebody else, or it is a quick text. Those things still can be meaningful, but absolutely in person. And I use that time in the operating room to broach those conversations in non-critical portions of the case to say, hey, let's kind of talk about this, or let's put a pin in it. When you recognize, hey, this is a tough conversation, I want to circle back to this, and actually making time to have those conversations.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Dr. Resnick.
Yes, sir.
How can surgeons build resilience within a healthcare system that often feels misaligned with how it is that they define meaningful work versus how we define meaningful work?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and we've seen the rise in hospital administrators. We all experience the quality measures that we're being subject to, which, as Mike said, is basically checking the epic boxes type stuff. I think the answer is there's not one answer for every situation, but I think there are some general principles. I think early in the career, our trainees coming out getting their first job, I think it is critical to evaluate the opportunity in terms of what you're being measured on and making sure that those measurements are not antithetical to what you want to be doing. And so, for example, most new jobs out there are now hospital-employed positions. And the criteria for succeeding in these hospital-employed positions is usually RVU-based. And the RVU targets are all over the place. Some of them are reasonable, 6,000, 8,000. Some of them are 20,000, 24,000 RVUs for a young surgeon coming out into practice. That is ridiculous, and that will lead to bad behavior, it will lead to dissatisfaction, and it is a mismatch. You're not supposed to be doing surgery to make money. It's great to be paid to do surgery, but you shouldn't be chasing the dollar with your procedures. But patients aren't RVU opportunities, they're people. So for the younger spine surgeons, have someone older look at that contract, and then once you have a contract that's reasonable, just forget about it. Do what you want to do what you're supposed to be doing, take care of your patients, grow your practice, grow your life. I mean, this is the time when you're having kids, you're getting married. This is like the beginning of the payback finally. You're paying off your loans finally. So just forget about it. Pass your boards, get your first promotion. Then as you start to get older, you start to get you're 7, 8, 10 years out. All of a sudden, these things start to grind at you. All these admin speak phrases. Never events. We'll talk about a load of crap. My advice then is you have to make a choice. You can get involved. Many of us, as we go through as we rise through the ranks in academics or in a large practice, you are thrown into positions where you have to participate in this process, and it is awful. These people don't speak the same language. They don't work the same hours. Meetings are routinely scheduled at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, right in the middle of your operating day. They make it absolutely impossible to enjoy the process and extremely difficult. So you either got to go and get in or just let it go. The problem with letting it go is that if you're not at the table, you're part of the meal. You're on the menu, and so things are going to go bad. So you have to participate to some extent, but you have to find your breaking point. And you have to participate up until you can, and when you can't, you just got to let it go. It's just not that important.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks to all of our panelists. These were really insightful and meaningful. And the question is that these are folks that have been doing it, that have been living it, and these are the lessons that you've learned and that you're trying to relay to the young folks out there. Listen up, make some changes, and to those of us that are in leadership positions, we have the opportunity to advocate for our young, healthy, budding spine surgeons, and it's important to us to be able to put contracts in place that actually incentivize them appropriately so that they can maintain some semblance of life. And it's not all necessarily about let's make sure that everybody has all the time off, but just make sure that we're checking in with them, we're doing the right things for them. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Thanks to the panel. And we're going to bring up our final speaker here. Thank you so much.